Hey guys, how's it going? So today I want to do something a little bit different. So, a few of you guys have been asking me what's been harder, Spanish or Cantonese, and people have been saying, how does learning Spanish compare to learning Cantonese? What's different? So instead of just saying, X language is harder without giving a proper explanation, I'm going to try and go a little bit deeper than that. So hopefully you guys can understand what are the main stumbling blocks, in my opinion, of each language, and then come up with a scoring system to do it fair and unbiasedly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into 6 main sections, and I'm going to say, in my opinion, based on my past experience learning, which of these two is harder in each of those 6 categories, and then have 1/7 category, other, which I will leave for tiebreakers if necessary. So I'm going to split it into vocabulary acquisition, grammar, listening comprehension, pronunciation, the writing system, availability of resources, and other. Without further ado, I'm going to start with vocabulary acquisition. So without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, you look at Spanish and you look at Cantonese, the one thing that makes vocabulary acquisition easier is something called a lexical distance. So how close is this language and the words you're learning in that language to one you already know. So for a native English speaker, Spanish is much closer to English than Cantonese, so you get a massive overlap of vocabulary. So that means in Cantonese there's less overlap and it's much harder to learn new words, so I'm going to give the first point to Cantonese. Next, grammar. So if you may or may not know, in Cantonese, grammar at the very basic level is really straightforward. You have one form of each verb and it does no conjugation whatsoever. If you want to make a sentence past tense, you add the particle "jo" to the end of the verb, and that is the same for every single verb. If you want to make it future tense, you add the word "would" before it, "would," and that is the same for every single verb. So, give a quick example. I go to the park. I went to the park. I will go to the park. And it's exactly the same in every single every single tense. On the other hand, Spanish, you not only have a bunch of different verbs depending on what tense you're speaking, but on who's saying it. And I think that, in general, makes Spanish grammar a bit more tricky, especially the verbs. Now, sentence structure is really close to English, but I still think, on the whole, Spanish is a bit harder in this one, so I'm going to give this point to Spanish. Next, listening comprehension. So, once you've got the words, I'm going to separate this from vocabulary acquisition. Once you've got the words, you know the words, how easy it is then to pick them out in a sentence and to hear the flow of the language, right? So, a few things make this hard. So I'm going to start with Cantonese. I think things that make this hard is a high amount of homophones. Words that sound the same, like for example in English, two, and two, but have different meanings. So, in Cantonese, there is the tones, which make it harder. There's long and short vowels. There's a lot of homonyms, and all the words tend to be 1 or 2 syllables, so they sound like really short sounds. And all that combined, I think, makes Cantonese much harder when listening in Spanish, compared to Spanish, where they might speak fast, but they tend to have quite long, lengthy words, and it helps you catch them easier in the flow of the sentence, so I'm going to give this one to Cantonese. So next, pronunciation. Now, this is going to be a little bit different depending on what you're good at already. So, for example, in Cantonese, a lot of people would really struggle pronouncing the tones. And in Spanish, you've got particularly the trilled R, which is really, really hard to pronounce properly. And that's something I can't do as well, and I struggle with a lot. So, purely because, especially coming from an English-speaking perspective, the alphabet can give you a false sense of how to pronounce a lot of stuff. And because of the trilled R, I'm going to say pronunciation is harder in Spanish. So, next moves on to the writing system. This one's easy. Spanish uses an alphabet, Cantonese uses Chinese characters. For an English speaker, Cantonese is much harder. Now, the last category I want to give out of the 6 is availability of resources. So, some people might think this might not really be relevant in terms of linguistically how hard a language is to learn. But if you are an independent solo learner, in my opinion, this is the most crippling thing that can stop you. If you don't have the resources, you can have the best methods in the world. It can be the easiest thing to learn in the world. But if you don't have what you actually need to get it done, then you are stuck. And it's absolutely crippling. So if I quickly compare the two, in Spanish there's a bunch of ebooks, audiobooks. You can get the same and read them and listen to them really, really easily. There's a ton on Netflix. It's super easy. So Cantonese is a lot harder. There's a lot less. So there's definitely a lot more resources for Spanish, and it's not even a little bit. It's absolutely overwhelmingly so. So in terms of availability of resources, which one's harder? I'm going to go with Cantonese. And then quickly, I've reserved this just to kind of give my own thoughts and say if there's anything else that I haven't been able to fit into one of the other categories that I think is a major stumbling block. So the thing that I wanted left to say is one of the hardest things, in my opinion, with Cantonese compared to any other language or most other languages is that there's a huge divide between the spoken and the written language. Written Chinese, which is how most people write books, newspapers, novels, and subtitles in movies and TV, is completely different to what people actually speak like everyday life. It's kind of like if you're familiar with England, having BBC English newscaster subtitles when you're listening to a Geordie speak really heavy Newcastle English.
She's going proper Roger, like, oh wait man, you going out now or what? I'm proper pagging me, I'm gonna get some kip. You're canny as you, aren't you?
It's completely different. Sure, there's going to be an overlap in vocabulary. Sure, it's going to be sort of the same thing, but it's still different. And this divide means you cannot use subtitles from TV or movies to learn what's being said. It means when you read a lot of books, if you read standard Chinese, probably half of the new words you learn you can't use when you're speaking. And this makes it very, very awkward and difficult to learn. So I hope you enjoyed that video. This was just a bit of fun for myself, and hopefully to give you an idea, if you're learning either of these two languages, maybe what are the major stumbling blocks and what you need to look out for when you're learning. So the end score, I had it 5 to Cantonese and 2 to Spanish, which means, in my opinion, Cantonese is the harder language to learn. Now, of course, learning any language isn't easy. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of dedication. So if you want tips on how to go about and the best way to do it, weekly motivation, please subscribe to my channel, click the bell, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.